Okay, so how did you guys get involved in accessibility work? Emma, if I could start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been doing accessibility work for a long time in a lot of different ways. I actually wrote my thesis in college about disability representation in theater. I was a paraprofessional at a school for children with disabilities, a steering committee member of the Cultural Access Collaborative, and I'm currently a teaching artist with a theater group in Chicago called ABLE, or Artists Breaking Limits and Expectations, where I work with actors with developmental and intellectual disabilities. And I am also a disabled person myself. So accessibility is personally important to me, and I feel like it finds its way into everything that I do. I am currently the Accessible Apprenticeship Program Manager at Apprenti, where I work with apprentices, training providers, employers, community partners to ensure accessibility and inclusion in apprenticeships.
And similar to Emma, I also started getting involved in the disability community and accessibility space when I was in college and did some international work with disability groups and decided to pursue a master's and focus on blindness and visual impairments and taught at California School for the Blind for several years and did some work with Stanford on inclusive design and design thinking. And now currently working with Emma on the accessibility team at Apprenti. And we get to design systems to ensure that apprentices with disabilities can complete the life cycle of the apprenticeship.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. So, like, what is Apparenti? If any of you could like take a stab as to like what it is.
Absolutely, yes. Apprenti is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that delivers registered apprenticeship programs to bridge the tech talent and diversity gaps. So by adapting the time-tested model of apprenticeship, Apprenti helps employers meet evolving workforce needs and trains future tech workers with an emphasis on underrepresented groups, which includes women, people of color, veterans, and people with disabilities. Apprentice programs are industry recognized and federally approved for employers with tech talent needs across the US.
Cool. So, like, you two oversee the access team at Apparenti. When did that team start, and like, how did you support apprentices as well as internal team members? So, if who wants to take a stab at that question?
I'll jump on that question. So Emma and I joined Apprenti in March of 2021, just 1 week apart. And when we came to Apprenti, we were tasked with this assignment of, can you make the program that we currently offer accessible to applicants and apprentices with disabilities? And so we did an audit of our system and tried to understand how apprentices engage with each touch point. And ultimately, in addition to improving the general accessibility of Apprenti, we created a clear and simple accommodation process. And so we connect directly with apprentices and seek to understand any barriers that they are experiencing or anything that's preventing them from full and complete participation in the program. And so rather than focusing on their diagnosis or requesting documentation of a disability diagnosis before meeting with them, we say anyone and everyone is welcome to meet with the access team. And we want to ask intentional questions to better understand you and your experience with the apprenticeship program. And then together, we seek to provide suggestions for potential accommodations. And it's very much a collaborative process where we're not prescribing accommodations, but we're saying based off our experience, working with lots of apprentices and our background in disability and accessibility, here's some suggestions that we think could work for you. They try it out and then report back to us what works, what doesn't, and we iterate from there. So in addition to that component of working with apprentices, there's also a large element of ensuring that our internal staff understand that disability is not something that's lessened, but doing training in efforts to normalize disability and talk about its prevalence, not just in our organization and with the apprentices that we work with, but across our entire nation. And so we've conducted a series of training that both focus on language and how we talk about disability, frameworks for addressing the social model of disability inclusion, and also highlighting digital accessibility to ensure that any materials that we are sharing with the public are accessible. So from marketing content to our website to our assessment, looking at making sure that our internal team understands the importance of that as well.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So like what kinds of external stakeholders do you partner with to forward the mission of Apprenti and the Access team?
Yeah, Marie talked about collaboration, which I think is so central to everything that we do. So we partner with employers who actually employ the apprentices that are in our programs and are often the organizations who are implementing workplace accommodations, right? Since it's where the apprentice works. We work with training providers to ensure that curriculum is accessible to all apprentices in the program. And then we work with community-based organizations as well as vocational rehabs to connect us with people with disabilities who would be great in apprenticeships. We also work closely with PIA, or the Partnership on Inclusive Apprenticeship, which is an initiative funded by the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy, or ODEP. PIA collaborates with employers and apprenticeship intermediaries like Apprenti to design inclusive apprenticeship programs that are meeting employer needs and also giving people with disabilities the opportunity to gain credentials, grow in their careers and in industries.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So like how does Apprenti impact underrepresented groups, specifically the disability community?
Yeah, so I'd say in a general sense, Apprenti seeks to provide opportunities to just general underrepresented groups. So that includes veterans, women, people of color, COVID displaced, and people with disabilities. And so, as Emma mentioned, we do outreach and have partnerships with community-based organizations that directly serve individuals with disabilities, and have created partnerships where there's a referral process, and we can better inform those groups about what Apprenti does. And currently, 17% of our apprentices self-disclose to have a disability.
That's cool. So like, how do you address the stigma surrounding disability? What steps are you taking to create an inclusive and welcoming environment for people with disabilities?
Yeah. Disability stigma is very, very challenging, and I think really central to the work that we do. I think one of the most important things when combating stigma around disability with employers specifically is that we want to highlight that people with disabilities are qualified to be in apprenticeship roles. I think there is this myth that we are lowering the bar when hiring people with disabilities, and that just simply isn't the case. There are people with disabilities who could be huge assets to employers if the right accommodations are in place for them. Many people with disabilities are creative problem solvers because they are navigating and innovating in their daily life in an inaccessible world. So I think that is a really important part of kind of calling out that stigma or those concerns that a person with a disability just will not be able to do the job, when in fact, often that is not the case. When it comes to our work and how we try to create a welcoming environment, we want apprentices and applicants to feel comfortable bringing their full selves to their apprenticeship. So we start by making the accommodation process, as Marie said earlier, really easy and really visible. It's in multiple places on our website. It's included in our orientations, in email communications, in lots of places, so that people can feel encouraged to reach out to us if they have a question. And many of the people that we meet with, this might be their first time seeking workplace accommodations. And so we want to demystify that process for them and make it something that is easy and approachable. Each person is totally unique. And so we are less focused on what the disability is in name and more interested in the way that that is impacting the individual. So we sit down with people, we ask lots of questions to get to know them better. What are their strengths? What are the barriers that they're currently facing? And how can we help eliminate some of those barriers or make adjustments in order for them to be more successful? So it is certainly a process that we are always engaging in, but we hope that by keeping our doors open and inviting people to come meet with us, that can help make things more accessible and inclusive.
Mm-hmm. What are 2 steps employers can take to establish a more inclusive and accessible workplace?
So one step is to make the accommodation process visible and simple. And what this means is put it on an application or put it on your website and say, if you have a disability or if you want to talk about accommodations, here's an email, here's a phone number where you can connect with us. And we have put that on our multiple spots on our website and in surveys. And we also make that process simple so that as soon as someone requests to meet with the access team, they get immediate feedback and know that it is not this long, arduous process, but that there's real humans behind them ready to engage in conversation. And the second thing I would say is I would encourage organizations to look at their meeting structure. So whether they're back in the office, look at where you're meeting and that the environment. Are there things in the room that are making it more difficult for people to either maneuver into and around the room? Or is it difficult for some people to hear content just because of the layout of the room and the echoes? Or are there windows in the room that are reducing or creating some glare on any screens or PowerPoint slide decks? And look at that physical space and improve the accessibility there. And if an organization is meeting remote, I would encourage them to look at adding captions to Zoom meetings or adding, sending out the slide deck beforehand to allow time for people to review it, or even when engaging and sharing information, to be as descriptive as possible with how they're, describing pictures or charts, and recognize that one, not everyone might be looking at the slide deck, or two, not everyone might have the ability to see all the same colors and content on the screen. And so just using as many different methods to share that information as possible in meetings can really increase accessibility for so many groups.
Mm-hmm. Finally, what advice would you give to an organization just starting their accessibility journey?
I think my advice would be just start. While I love the tenets of universal design and certainly think that we should be thinking about a broad range of users when designing our products and processes, you will not be able to design something that is perfectly accessible that you just design once and never touch again, right? Accessibility changes evolve over time. Access needs might compete with each other. And I think when it comes to accessibility, perfect can really be the enemy of the good. That there's this concern that if I start and try to make things accessible, I'll be found out as not having a fully accessible process. And I will just say that has not been our experience at all. We've started, there are certainly elements in our process that we could continue to improve when it comes to accessibility. And so I think the answer there is make it easy to get in touch with you so that if someone finds access issues in their process, they can reach out to you and let you know. We've certainly worked with apprentices who have helped us understand how we can make our processes more accessible. And I think that happens because we welcome and invite that conversation. So I think organizations can feel intimidated in thinking about all the different types of people with disabilities and all the types of accessible technology, which of course is really amazing that all these things exist, but it can start really small. As Marie said, are you having virtual meetings on Zoom? there is an automatic captions function built in. So maybe your organization doesn't have the money right now to pay for cart or live captioning for all your meetings, but you could start by turning on that automatic function. Or maybe your organization, it isn't possible to bring in an interpreter, for an ASL interpreter for every meeting. But for big group gatherings, could you make that a priority? How can you build accessibility into your budget so that it builds a little bit over time? Things that haven't been there, it's hard to bring those in. So start small, because those little tiny changes can end up building and making bigger changes along the way.
What about you, Marie? What advice would you give?
Oh, I really liked what Emma said. Start small. And I would also say, build, I would say, find other champions of accessibility in other organizations. And whether you connect with them online or follow them on LinkedIn, I think that the accessibility community is really growing and very collaborative in nature. And so use that to your advantage and reach out with questions, or just see what some other organizations are doing and how you can take one element. It doesn't have to be everything, but one element and apply that to your company.
Oh, can I add a little something? One thing that I've learned a lot from Marie in my work with her is work around digital accessibility. And that I think often when we think of people with disabilities, we might just think of someone in a wheelchair, but so much of our world is online right now. So Marie, do you want to maybe share a little bit about digital accessibility? Like, what might be some places where people could start if they were interested in learning more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So digital accessibility, I would say, is a foundational component to improving your organization's general access for individuals with disabilities. And what that really means is, in the same way we look at the physical environment and say, are there curb ramps to ensure that someone with a wheelchair can access that restaurant or your office? We say, so much of our world is in the digital space now. So can someone who might be colorblind, can they still access, which means can they still perceive and take in that information that's on a screen in the same way that someone would do who's not colorblind? Or can someone who might be deaf or hard of hearing, or can they still access a video, right? And they can if there's closed captions. And I think something that's been really neat in just the journey through digital accessibility is seeing how many different use cases there are, right? So when we add captions, it might be, some might think, okay, that's to support individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing, but it could also help someone who's, say, in a car and trying to follow along in a Zoom meeting, but they don't have their headphones and they don't want to play it out loud because they're with other people. But if there's captions, they can still access that same content. And so we try to be specific when designing for thinking about digital accessibility, but also go from a zoom in to a zoom out and say, well, what other groups or individuals could benefit from this? And there's great content online if you type in Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and for short we call it WCAG, and those are the guiding standards for how to make all things from websites to PDFs, how to make them accessible for anyone with a disability.
Yeah, but both your points are on point and spot on.